Well, it's indeed a pleasure to be back at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. This land was the first sanctuary for the protection and preservation of birds of prey, established in 1934, and it's a tribute to the whole because it's along these ridgeways that birds of prey would migrate in the fall. And these birds were heading on their way south, for this is referred to as the Atlantic Flyway. And these birds use these ridges as if they were interstate highways. And they traveled, migrated. Some of them, the broad-winged hawks, traveled from north of New York City all the way down to Peru. And that is amazing. And it's all part of the natural balance. It's all part of not just a small little thing, but of the totality of the whole. For these birds are very important to the ecosystem that we like to talk about as naturalists. Without these places, guess what? These birds would have been in big danger if they were shot and destroyed, as what happened in the late 1920s and the early 1930s. I have in my hand a wonderful book. It's called Hawks Aloft, and it was written by the first curator of this site, Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. His name was Maurice Broun, and along with his wife, Irma Broun, were the first people to put their lives on the line for preserving the birds that went by here. For what happened? Before this was a sanctuary, men would gather here prior to hunting season, small game, and they would practice up their ability to shoot. And so as these birds migrated south, they did what? Bang! 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 They'd shoot them out of the sky. And remnants of these birds fell down at the bottom of these lookouts. Well, a man by the name of Richard Poe came up here, and in a book, a magazine called Bird Lore, he took pictures of the slaughter of the hawks that were happening here. And so what happened was, this information spread, and along came a woman, and I might say she was quite a woman. She was no one to be messed with. And she was born and raised up in New York Central Park. And that's where she fell in love with birds. Now, she had quite a lot of money. And so she heard about the slaughter. She formed a committee called the Emergency Conservation Committee. And the Audubon Society was made aware of the slaughter here and said, well, we'll just wait a little bit, and then we'll make a decision. She said, no, I'm buying that land, and I'm going to turn it into the first sanctuary for birds of prey. And in 1934, it came to be. Now, we got to keep these hunter guys off of this mountain. So they hired Maurice and his wife, Irma. They got no salary when they moved up here, and they put their lives on the line. For many of these guys continued to come up here thinking they could walk up here and kill these birds. Well, Maurice Broun said it's now a sanctuary, and you are not going to be allowed to kill these birds, for they are migrating way far south, broadwings heading all the way to Peru. And so this became a battleground and a battlefield. And people put their lives on the line for this property. And so today we are standing on hallowed ground. It's one of those thin places where you just need to stand, look around, and let the land talk to your heart. Well, take a look out here. Look at this beautiful land. And you know, I mentioned a woman, but I never gave you her name. Her name was Rosalie Edge. And she happened to be someone who had quite a lot of money. And she created an emergency conservation committee and decided to take action. And she went and bought 1,401 acres of land and then said, this will become the first sanctuary for birds of prey. Now, speaking of women who are important in the environmental history of the world, there was another woman, and her name is Rachel Carson. And she wrote a book called Silent Spring. And that book irritated a lot of people who believed that we should just blast the land with pesticides, DDT, and all the rest of those chemicals. And she said, no. For my research has taught me that someday, by the use and overuse of those chemicals, we might not be able to hear the birds in spring. Thus the title of her book. So I mentioned Rosalie Edge, I mentioned Rachel Carson, and Irma Broun, who they said was as undaunted as her husband, Maurice, taking a stand and not being moved in any direction. They looked you right in the eye and said, we're taking over this land, no matter what you think. And now we get to experience it today. Well, here I'm sitting at the South Lookout on this great sanctuary, Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. And you might say to me, what does this land mean to you personally? Well, when I was 9 years of age, my family decided we were going to walk up to the North Lookout. And my grandmother was not young and spry, but she and my mother and my brother and my father and me walked to the North Lookout. I was 9 years of age. I had no plans of what I wanted to do in the future. But it was on that day, with my binoculars around my neck, I'm standing with a desire that now was put in my heart to get involved with the environmental movement. And so I pursued that, and later went on to be a ranger with the National Park, later went on to teach for 27 years in the environmental education field, and went on to inspire a lot of people to follow in my footsteps. And a lot of that is because of that man that we're trying to find, and his name is Freeman Tilden. He wrote that book, Interpreting Our Heritage, and gave us 6 principles that we can follow in order to be the best interpreters that we can be. And so I returned to the place where I first was inspired. And now as I return, I sit here and think, You know, all these things that happened in your life, Rich, were not perchance. They were meant to be. And I challenge you, interpreters, geologists, educators, to think along those same lines. There is a place where in the past you were inspired. And if you haven't been inspired, it's time to find those roots and let them talk to you again. And you will never forget. Your enthusiasm will never die, for you have a message to share with the whole.